As Nigeria's economy continues to suffocate the poor by not letting them breathe, normally, Nigerians are beginning to speak up against some of the policies of the federal government of Nigeria. Last week, the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria advised President Bola Tinubu to slow down on the implementation of drastic economic policies to avoid dislocating Nigeria's economy. Also, a pro-democracy civil society organization, Global Integrity Crusade Network, GICN, said that President Bola Tinubu implemented toxic economic policies within 2 months as Nigerian president. The group lamented that the Nigerian economy, which is Africa's largest, is currently in disarray. However, wife of the Ogun State Governor, Mrs. Bamidele Abiodun, says she recognized President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's economic policies as being in the best interest of the nation. She said this while debunking a statement credited to her criticizing the president's policies. Joining us now on the morning show is Professor Perekunah Eragha, Professor of Macroeconomics at the School of Management and Social Sciences, Pan Atlantic University, Lagos. Good morning, Professor Eragha, and welcome to the morning show.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Professor Eragha, what Ayo is simply saying is that all of us have been grappling with Tinubunomics, as we may otherwise label it. Removal of subsidy, harmonization of the foreign exchange regime, steps taken, executive orders on taxation, and here we are, all of us, more than 75 days later. NLC is protesting, doctors are unhappy, ordinary people are saying fuel price, if it goes up, they will not be able to breathe again. What do you think of Tinubunomics in your capacity as an expert in that area of macroeconomics?
Okay, good morning, Dr. Abatian, to everyone. I think first, let me start by saying that I think 4 months ago, before this government came on board, the World Bank presented their Nigeria Development Update. I remember at the LBS where I attended. And they said for 6 months, 6 month period to that time, they presented the same report and they recommended 3 things. One of them is exchange rate that is market reflective, and then subsidy removal. 3 of them, but I could remember just 2 of them. Now, when they made that statement and they said a lot of things, why, if, according to them, if government has taken those reforms, then Nigeria would have been better. So luckily I was in that meeting and I raised up my hand to say that if Nigeria has taken those steps 6 months ago, 6 months after that you are presenting this report, I don't think Nigeria will be in a better place. I said, yes, I agree that we need to take those decisions. Yes, because they are imagining and considering the fundamentals. But there are reasons why I don't think that they will have the desired effect that they are talking about. So my points then were of the following. For instance, subsidy removal, I support the idea of subsidy removal. But my first point is that if you remove subsidy, which is deregulated market, it means that there is no price control. Now, for the kind of market that we have in the oil sector, are we going to have a perfectly competitive market? Because that is where demand and supply will be so reflective to determine price for proper allocation of resources. I don't think that will happen. So my point then was that what we are going to have is more of an oligopolistic market. And there are 2 cases that will happen in that market. Number 1 is we're going to have, a market where a collusive market, a collusive oligopoly is a situation where, the sellers who are the suppliers just collude to determine the price, which is almost like a price control kind of a system. But the second case is a case where you have a price leader and and then others follow, and that is the one that will be happening more in Nigeria in the case of the NNPC and then all other what we call the major marketers will just be following. So NNPC is the price leader, then followed by that. If we are going to have all of these 2, which are the type of market structure that we're going to have in this system, then I don't think that regulation will benefit us. And I told them this because I said, as of today, what our consumption per day is not known. NNPC will give us a figure, custom will come out and tell us that those figures are not right. That then implies that there are still issues around transparency with regards to the demand, which is consumption. And then on the supply side, who will determine the supply? If the supply is going to come from NNPC or the few other ones that will join NNPC, where NNPC will then be a leader and then they are followers, which is an oligopolistic market instead of a perfectly competitive system that allow price to be a reflective of demand and supply. That's my first point. Then I took them up on exchange rate. And my point on exchange rate was this. I agree with the fact that we need to unify exchange rate. And one of the reasons why we unify exchange rate, or two of them had this. One is that when your exchange rate, which is the parallel and the official, gap between them become widened, the implication is that those who are supposed to bring in capital flows or investors within the system will starve the real sector. So what they do, that they will be doing round tripping instead of putting the money in the banks where it will finance real sector, and they will be using that to do round tripping in the forex market, and that will starve the economy in terms of money, liquidity, right? The second reasons why we do unification is of the fact that you want to isolate the pressure of fiscal, policy. As of today, don't forget that fiscal policy is at variance with monetary policy. What do I mean? Fiscal policy in Nigeria is expansionary. We have a budget deficit of about 11 trillion. But monetary policy is contractionary, which is at variance, right? So if you are going to have those kind of fiscal policies where we have expansionary in terms of deficit financing, what that will mean is that it will transmit to domestic prices. And one of the ways to isolate that is to push that into the parallel market. So when the gap becomes widened, which we had in the recent case for about 70%, what then will happen in that kind of economy is that the isolation breaks down, so domestic prices begin to trend up, right? So that is why you see fiscal policy effect driving inflation in a system. I said that is one thing that will happen. So if you do unification, it is fine, but the fundamentals that we have today don't support that. And these are my point. Unification is that you devalue your currency, right? Devaluation to a level where it will be almost the same thing with the parallel. So what that will mean is that at the medium term, we should have a stability in exchange rate. That would only happen when that devaluation trigger export earnings vis-a-vis to increase in output and job creation and then revenue. That's when that will bring more inflow of forex, foreign earning vis-a-vis to reserve accretion, and then that will basically lead to stability. That's one part. The other part is that because the export earnings will be spoiled, then capital will flow in also. So all of this will bring in accretion of reserve. But in our case, that will not happen because the major export product that we have today, because all of that products are not tradable and they are not export competitive or globally competitive, is oil. And oil today, the price is not a function, or the demand is not a function of adjustment in exchange rate. Therefore, when you adjust exchange rate, the export earning that should come to mop up your reserve for stability will not happen. And you see the effect going into transmission into domestic prices, and then what we call purchasing power being declining that we have today. Those are the arguments I gave them. And I said, so for me, the first thing is to look at the fundamentals and think about how we can resolve the fundamentals before we go ahead to do that. So if you are going to do unification, my point to them was that do a unification, but have what we call a managed floating within a band, so that it's not going to be allowed to move up, because what we have, supply will suffer, therefore it will keep declining. So one is to ensure a proper managed floating within the band, so that unification will bring it back to close to what we call the parallel market, but also ensure that the market has transparency, BDC, commercial banks, and all of that, where this, because the major supplier to the market is still CBN, vis-a-vis from the oil proceeds. So we need to now monitor that properly for transparency. If those things are not going to happen, then we should not expect the desired effect. By the way, these are just short-term distortions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Eragha. Now, in your estimation, with regards to the president's statement that what we need as a people is patience, that his policies will eventually, produce good. Do you think that it was time on the 29th of May to have removed fuel subsidy without putting in place certain measures to ensure that the effect of it would not be significant on the people? Or do you think it was just a bullet that had to be bitten, and irrespective of when it would be done, we would have still felt the effect of it? What would you have recommended as a better way to have managed this process for Nigerians?
Yeah, so already we've taken those two steps, the unification and the subsidy, right? So for me, for the unification, I would have expected a band in terms of managed floating that is within the band, because we don't have the fundamentals to trigger forex supply to the market. So that's what I would have expected. On subsidy removal, right, we all know quite well that petrol, even though there are arguments in economics. By the way, in the morning I saw when Rufai was speaking around, speaking of the fact that the economic theories sometimes don't meet to reality. The truth is that it's not because economic theories don't meet to realities, but when if you situate theories within the realities in a deeper, analysis, which we call the economic intelligence analysis, then you are going to have dimensions of the Fed before you take that decision. What do I mean? In the past, we have had, devaluation. So one way to, before taking a decision on unification, is to say, can we look at periods where we have large devaluations? And there are episodes of that from 1980 to date. And what are the responses of the fundamentals in terms of macroeconomic indicators, which is capital flow is one of them that is so important, because it's going to bring in more capital vis-a-vis to reserve to stabilize the exchange rate. Right? Look at, for instance, so many of these dimensions that today we are suffering or we are talking about. Look at how they will respond. So we look at the different episodes and then do some scenario analysis that will tell us that if we take this level of unification, this is a dimension of effect to have across the different macroeconomic variables. That is when a decision would have been taken. So for me, that would have been done. And I expect that it should have been done, but that should have been done. So that by now, when we have this kind of reaction or this kind of result, then we'll go back to what is the next scenario or next step that should take, because when you do scenario analysis, it gives you different strategies to do with regards to how you can, bring out palliative or begin to curb the effect. So for me, this would have been properly done, come up with the strategies, and then provide guides into what to be done, considering a number of things that will happen, which would have done in analysis. So for me, that would have been one thing that would have been done going forward. But now that it has come, we all know quite well that palliative is very important. And we know when one of the palliative, even the World Bank people pushing about, is giving money to household of 4 people of 8,000, and that money is going to come from borrowed money. For me, I don't support that.
Professor Eragha, because of time,
go ahead.
I want you to, and I understand about scenario planning and all of that in economics. I want you to run me, because you said something now that I disagree with. You said we should float according to a band, and I'll say in an economy where you don't have enough defense, FX defense, it will not work. So please run me the econometric analysis of floating for a band in an economy where you have net FX rates of less than $17 billion. Run me the econometric analysis. Positing many scenarios.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So I think I made that statement in my first presentation to say that, one of the basic reasons for unification, and I think that will help, which is that when there is serious gap between the official and the parallel, and our case was about 70%, what that means is that the fiscal pressure, we all know quite well the cost of governance is high, and it has not been, we have not taken reforms around that. The fiscal pressure that should, the fiscal pressure on domestic price will be curbed, right? But when this gap widens, that isolation will break down. It then implies that prices will respond to adjustment to large premium. That's what will happen. That's one. The second case is that those who are supposed to put their money in banks or bring in capital flows to finance the real sector will just be looking around this round-tripping distance, and these are all disadvantage to the economy. It's the reason why we do unification. So unification is fine, but unification should be done in an analysis where we will know that if we take this level, this will be the effect on the macroeconomy, and therefore so if you are going to move from a 420 to let's say a 750, then you must have a cap into where you are going, and then have a band in which it is properly managed, because the only source of supply, which you have said, is still the central bank. And because that, and where is the central bank getting money from? The same export from crude oil. So my point is that we have this supply shortage with regards to FX to the market. Therefore, yes, if we take unification, it will take away this round tripping, but that has to be properly monitored between the banks and all the people involved, because there's also no transparency around that. That's one. Two is that if we take that unification, that if a breaking down effect on domestic price will also be removed. That is also one. Because what will happen is that we're going to have increased revenue from Naira perspective and then expenditure, and therefore we expect that export will boom. But in our own case, export will not boom because our export is not a function of exchange rate adjustment. Therefore, the fundamentals don't support that. But we still need to take that unification because that gap is so much, and it will starve the the domestic economy with liquidity that should be used to finance the real sector. That's my point.
Very much, Professor Eragha, for joining us on the morning.